Charles, at 35, ran an empire of fine dining restaurants and real estate investments that lit up the Polanco district in Mexico City. Outwardly, his routine was a showcase of wins. Inside, he wrestled with a silence even his panoramic apartment couldn't fill. One early morning, with no meetings, he heard from the chef that the produce had been lousy lately and customers were noticing. He decided to personally visit the rural market in Valle de Bravo to find trustworthy growers. His secretary tried to talk him out of it, but he saw the trip as a chance to escape the office's mirrored glass. 2 hours later, the black sedan stopped on a muddy road. Colorful canvas awnings shaded simple stalls, the smell of cilantro competing with lively voices. Charles, used to marble floors, felt the mud swallow his expensive shoes and kept going, intrigued. That's when a modest stall caught his eye. A girl about 9, knees dirty, was stacking heads of lettuce with almost choreographed care. He bent down to ask the price, but the words stuck. The girl's expression, the shape of her eyebrows, and the tiny mark on her forehead perfectly echoed Marina, his ex-wife, someone he'd been trying to erase from memory for years. His heart went off like a sudden alarm, and for a moment that felt endless. Charles completely forgot where he was. In the soft, late afternoon light, Charles froze when he noticed on the girl's forehead a dark crescent identical to the mark of Lisa, the woman he'd left 10 years earlier. Memories flashed. Her laughter in the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread, the touch of hands he'd traded for ambition. Dazed, he stared at the girl, wondering if fate was handing him an heir. She lifted a basket of greens and said, "Want to take some, sir? Picked them today, no chemicals." The line made him breathe again, but didn't calm his unease. Charles paid double, unable to take his eyes off that mark. When the girl, whom a vendor had called Julia, headed down the dirt road between cornfields, he gave in to impulse and followed at a distance. The fragile sway of her body, the smell of damp soil, and the thrushes singing turned the path into a tunnel back to the past. The waxing moon shimmered between dark strands of hair, reminding him of the love he'd swapped for numbers. Julia stopped in front of an adobe house with rusty tiles and a plank door. She slid the basket off her shoulder and sighed with relief. Hidden behind an ipe tree, Charles felt his heart pound. If he crossed that gate, he might discover the story he'd abandoned was still there, alive and beating. Yet his feet seemed stuck to the ground, suspended between regret and hope. Charles stepped onto the porch when a voice called, "Julia, are you back? Give the veggies to Mom." The sound froze him. It was Lisa. Swallowing hard, he moved forward. She appeared in the doorway with a basket. She was thinner, her skin sun-marked, her hair dull, but her eyes still held kindness. Seeing him, she froze. The basket fell, potatoes rolling like marbles. "Why did you come?" she stammered. Charles searched for air. In the corner, a man was mending a fishing net. Must be the new husband. A 5-year-old boy clung to his mother's legs, studying the stranger. Julia came with another basket and stood beside Lisa, calm. The scene squeezed Charles's chest. There was little luxury here, but warmth overflowed, a cruel contrast to the silence of his marble-clad apartment. Lisa found her voice and stepped aside. The coffee, brewed in an old pot, smelled of wet earth. They sat at a wobbly bamboo table, and the ticking clock seemed to shout. After long minutes, he broke the silence. "The girl with the scar on her forehead looks like you. Whose blood is she?" Lisa's hand shook, spilling a dark thread onto the wood. "Don't say that," she whispered, while Julia added, "I'm her daughter, and my dad's." Even so, Lisa's gaze wavered, as if hiding an old secret. Charles felt the weight of an answer he might not want to hear. Then, in a slow move, he stood up, looked at every face present, and, with a trembling voice, Charles broke the silence in the narrow room. "I've spent 10 years surrounded by luxury, but with no kids. I have a home, cars, trips, and a brilliant wife who never asks if I'm sad. Every night I feel a hole right here." He looked at Julia, who was drawing on the porch, and the memory pulled him back to Lisa. Lisa kept her gaze steady, but moist eyes betrayed her. "You wanted to fly higher. Now you have everything. I kept this little house." She pointed around, where Gabriel patched nets while the kids stacked pebbles in the yard. The roof creaked, yet the kids' laughter filled every crack. Charles watched the scene like a visitor from another world. He smelled corn on the stove, heard Kevin whistling, felt the afternoon heat coming through glassless windows. In contrast, he remembered parties with sparkling glasses and shallow talk that ended in silence. His eyes burned, not from regret, but from the proof of emptiness. Unhurried, Lisa told her path after the divorce. She came back to Valle de Bravo, met Gabriel on the pier. They married. Julia and Kevin were born. "Sometimes we don't even have money for tortillas," she said. "But every night Gabriel makes up pirate stories and the kids fall asleep smiling. I drift off to laughter, not echo." Charles swallowed hard. There was something in that space that doesn't show up on a bank statement. Something that had slipped through his fingers while he added zeros to the balance. His fingers trembled, as if searching his own skin for the outline of what he'd lost. Charles's chest tightened when Julia's soft voice filled the room. The lullaby took him back to the nights with Lisa when she sang to him after exhausting days. Now, in his empty apartment, there was only an expensive sound system pouring out Mozart with no effect on the soul. Swallowing the discomfort, he touched the small mark on the girl's arm. "Lisa, this can't be a coincidence." She shrugged, her smile tight. "The world pulls tricks, don't freak out." Charles remembered too much. Before the divorce, Lisa was expecting a baby. Afterward came the news of the loss. The light in her eyes now put together pieces that had never fit. Not daring to go back to the capital, he rented a cheap room along the highway. The bed squeaked, the fan groaned, and his mind spun between Julia, Lisa, and the company Nicole ran with a firm hand. He still called his wife. "I'm going to stay here longer." Old loose ends. Nicole laughed, sarcastic. "Loose ends or ghosts? The board wants you here." He hung up. Explaining would be pointless. At sunrise, Charles bought fruit, milk, and candy. He knocked on Lisa's door. She pulled back. "We don't need charity." Gabriel appeared behind her, sun-browned face, gentle voice. "Daughter, you don't turn away kindness." Charles noticed there was no jealousy in those eyes, only concern. That simplicity disarmed him more than any argument. There on the doorstep, each carried an invisible weight heavier than the bags, and no one knew which step to take first. Charles stayed with the family a little longer. He asked Julia what made her happiest day today. "Going to school," she said, "but it's far. When it rains, I can't get there." The answer kept echoing. In Mexico City, he saw kids arriving in shiny SUVs. Here, the girl slogged miles through mud. He turned to Gabriel. "Does fishing cover the bills?" Gabriel shrugged. "We get by, but just. There's less fish. Sometimes I come back with empty nets." The frankness opened space for another revelation. "When Lisa got pregnant with Julia, we got married. I knew she wasn't mine, but she needed support." Charles stared at Lisa. The girl's name pressed on him like a warning. Maybe she was his daughter. He swallowed the urge to ask. He needed proof, not guesses. In the afternoon, by Lake Valle de Bravo, he watched the still water and remembered the divorce. Ambitious, he had escaped poverty, trading love for promises of wealth. Lisa had signed without arguing. Years later, he had money but also empty rooms and silent nights. He decided to stay longer. He rented a simple little house and meeting Lisa spoke straight. "I don't want to break up your family. I just need to know if Julia carries my blood and if it makes sense, help you." She lowered her eyes. "Go back to your life. Don't complicate things." Even so, a silent plea for help trembled in her eyes, and he couldn't ignore it. That night, rain dumped on the village, shaking rooftops. In the rented house, Charles heard every drip and thought of Julia and the lost years. At dawn, he walked through flooded streets to the small school. The building held on with cracked tiles, wobbly desks, the smell of wet wood. The teacher said Julia learned fast but missed classes because she had to help her mom at the produce stand. The image of the girl torn between books and bags of lettuce pounded in his head on the muddy shortcut back. Right then, he decided, he'd build a road linking the village to the school so neither mud nor storms would steal classes. He explained to Lisa it wasn't charity but settling accounts. She listened in silence, her eyes still wary. Over the next few days, he stuck around. He rented a room next to Lisa's, walked slippery trails, watched Julia play with her brother, and noted every sign that might link her to him. He still needed proof. So the next morning he sought out Doña Susan, the oldest resident around. He found her spinning yarn at the door, bright eyes, a smile hiding stories. "Tell me, young man, what's someone from Mexico City doing stuck in these parts?" Charles held her gaze. I need the truth about Julia, Lisa's daughter." When she finally broke the silence, the old woman revealed that Lisa had come to the village already pregnant. She'd spent months secluded, given birth alone, and later married Gabriel, who welcomed Julia without question. Still in postpartum confinement, Lisa would sob when she mentioned the man who'd turned his back on her. With a heavy heart, Charles thanked her and left. He needed facts, not rumors. In the capital, he asked a doctor friend to arrange a DNA test. Before dawn, he quietly plucked a few strands of Julia's hair and sent them along with his own sample. Endless days followed, swinging between hope and fear. On a rainy dawn, the envelope arrived. His hands shook as he read, "Father-daughter compatibility, 99.5%. The chair caught him when his legs gave out. Julia was his daughter. For a decade, Lisa had kept the secret. Rage, pain, and compassion collided, but the decision was quick. He had to face her. That afternoon, he returned to the modest house where Lisa was mending clothes and Julia was reading silently. Gabriel hadn't come back from fishing yet. Charles set the report on the table, letting the paper speak first. "Tell the truth," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Julia is mine, isn't she?" Lisa's face went pale. A tear slipped down before she answered. "How could you hide this?" he pressed, taking a deep breath. 10 years of carrying guilt without knowing why. She shut her eyes, swallowed her tears, and started to talk. Lisa stared straight at Charles without flinching. Her voice came out steady but soft, like every word still hurt. She revealed that when he walked out, she was 3 months pregnant. She'd tried to tell him. He'd rejected any ties. Afraid of trapping him out of duty, she went back to Valle de Bravo and brought Julia into the world, determined to raise her alone. Time rolled on. Gabriel found out, asked for her hand, and promised to love the little girl like his own. They got married, and the new family found a fragile peace, until Charles showed up that cloudy afternoon. Lisa's confession cracked the exec's armor. Charles dropped to his knees, admitted his mistake, and swore he wouldn't ignore Julia. The moment hung in the air until the growl of a luxury car sliced through the silence. Nicole, his current wife, arrived with mud-splattered heels and eyes already handing down sentences. "You vanished for a week and left the company in chaos," she shot. "This is why?" Her gaze slid over Lisa and the child, weighing every detail, every threat to her place. She called Julia illegitimate, pumping up a tension you could almost touch. Torn between anger and guilt, Charles dragged her outside before the wound bled in public. "Stay out of this," he snarled, his voice cracking at the end. The heavy air held the unspoken question. What would it cost to fix the past without wrecking the present? Nicole raised her voice without blinking. "You're dumping me in this godforsaken nowhere? I was the one who climbed every step of that career with you." Before leaving, she fired the final shot. "If you insist on staying with these people, your company will collapse. I won't let you throw everything away." The storm was dumping buckets when Charles stood alone on the porch. Between claps of thunder, he weighed 2 different losses. On one side, the career that had cost him sleepless nights. On the other, the daughter who no longer fit in the empty past. Hours later, deep into the night, Gabriel pushed the door open, still smelling of the sea. Worn out from the fishing trip, he felt the thick silence in the house. It took only minutes for Lisa, through sobs, to spill every detail. Gabriel listened without moving, then leaned against the wall, breathed deep, and spoke with the calm of a man who decides things out at sea. "I've known for a while that Julia doesn't share my blood, but that never mattered. She calls me Dad, and that's how I want it to stay. You're the biological father, Charles. If you even think about taking her away, I won't allow it." Charles dropped his eyes, water from his coat pooling on the floorboards. "I didn't come to fight for custody. I just want to make up for the time I let slip." Gabriel nodded once. "Then show your words are worth more than storm season promises." Gabriel filled his lungs and let out almost in a whisper, "You need to know, Lisa didn't tell you everything." Charles's name hung in the air, too heavy. Lisa trembled, slid the lid off a small wooden box that had blended into the room, and set a crumpled envelope in his hands. "Read it, please," she said, her voice barely reaching him. Charles's fingers, still disbelieving, fought the old seal. The paper creaked in protest. Inside, familiar handwriting jumped back 10 years. "Charles, the baby is yours. Don't blame yourself. You always dreamed big, and I couldn't pull you down. I'll raise our daughter alone. Live, but don't look for us. If you ever read this, forgive me." The last line hit hard. Charles's defenses cracked. Tears came before words. He pulled Lisa into an urgent hug. "You shouldn't have carried this alone. I won't tear down what you built, but I'm not running away again." Lisa stepped back. "Go, before things get worse." Outside, rain cut the silence. Under the eaves, Charles felt the water and the weight of the letter blend. For 10 years, he'd chased applause and contracts and come back empty-handed. Now he saw the price. He looked at Lisa, voice hoarse, almost begging, "Why did you stay quiet? Maybe I would have stayed." The question echoed as thunder warned the night still held more revelations. Rain drummed on the cabin roof when Lisa tasted her own salty tears. "You always wanted to touch the sky," she whispered, "and I was afraid to clip your wings." Gabriel, calm, laid a hand on her shoulder. "Leave the past where it is. It came back and has to decide on its own." Outside, Charles listened, head down, respect mixing with shame. "Gabriel, thank you. I know I don't deserve it." A brief smile crossed the fisherman's face. He asked Lisa to offer tea to the visitor, kissed the sleeping kids, and headed to the river, rods on his shoulder, making space for a reckoning that wasn't his. The silence didn't last. An engine roared in the night, and the headlights of Nicole's car exploded across the soaked boards. She jumped out, hair plastered to her face, and her voice split the storm. "Charles, get back here now. The company's sinking. 2 investors just pulled out. Are you going to let everything collapse?" He stepped onto the porch, breathing hard. "I just need a little time." "Time?" She let out a humorless laugh. "I'm not going to stand by while you play perfect little home with whoever you left behind." The word home echoed between them like thunder, hinting at the showdown the night still held. Lisa shoved Julia and Kevin inside before the scene could stick in their memories. Outside, Gabriel stood firm, a silent guard. Just a few steps away, Nicole pointed a finger at Charles and delivered the final blow. "Decide. Come back with me and rescue your career, or stay and watch everything crumble. There's no middle ground." Charles felt the weight of every syllable. He knew the company was teetering on the edge. Hundreds of families depended on that yes. Even so, when he saw Julia peeking from behind Lisa, the ground shifted. The air grew thicker, as if the next breath demanded a choice no executive ever learns to make. At that exact moment, fate walked through the front door. A man burst in, soaked, his face nearly colorless. "Gabriel had an accident. The boat flipped on the lake." The world shrank in a second. Lisa dropped everything and bolted toward the shore. Charles froze, then sprinted after her. Behind them, Nicole whispered, "This is insane," but stayed put, caught between pride and the fear of being left alone. By the time they reached the lake, the villagers had already formed a semicircle around the cold body 2 fishermen were dragging onto dry land. Lisa fell to her knees and hugged Gabriel, not caring that water soaked her clothes. "Baby, wake up!" Julia and Kevin trembled, unable to grasp why their father wouldn't answer. Charles knelt beside him, searched for a pulse, felt the faint breath, and tore through the silence. "Call an ambulance!" Night had already swallowed the road when word came that the clinic was unreachable. Mud up to the knees, bridges down, road blocked. Charles's eyes shot to Nicole in a silent plea. "Only you can get through. Take Gabriel," he begged, voice cracking. Nicole chewed over her answer, annoyed. "My car isn't an ambulance." But Lisa's broken sobs, clutching the kids, shattered Nicole's last bit of resistance. The men improvised a stretcher, laid Gabriel across the back seat, and everyone squeezed into the sedan. The engine roared, splattering mud, while Nicole kept her eyes glued to the sliver of asphalt ahead, hands on the wheel so tight they'd gone white. Inside the car, every jolt reminded them how fragile Gabriel was. Charles held his friend's wrist, feeling the weak pulse, fighting thoughts of what would happen to Lisa and the children if that already cold body gave out. The ER met them with its usual cold checklist. Severe hypothermia, broken tibia, immediate surgery, sky-high cost. Lisa could barely sign the admission papers. Charles grabbed the pen. "I'll cover everything. Save him." Hours felt like minutes in the pale green hallway where Nicole watched it all. Charles pacing on the phone with the bank. Lisa curled on a plastic chair, the kids leaning against their mother's knees. The nurse announced the OR was ready. Before the doors swung shut, Nicole let out the question stuck in her throat. Would you do all this for love? Charles shook his head, eyes fixed on the frosted glass panel. It's not about love. It's a debt I've carried for 10 years. Nicole let out a short, almost inaudible laugh, like she'd swallowed a burning memory. Debt? Ever think how much that word hurts me too? Charles stared at her, stunned. Until then he'd sworn she stayed only for the comfort of his money and the clout his last name brought. But her confession rearranged everything inside him. I know there's no room for me in your heart, she said, voice trembling. But your name has lived in mine since day one. If you'd rather stay here, I'll step aside. I just need the truth. Guilt pressed on his shoulders. I'm sorry. I can't go back to who I was, he murmured. Nicole spun on her heel, eyes glassy. But instead of leaving, she chose a corner of the hospital corridor. Intrigued, Charles canceled meetings, told his assistant to freeze every contract, and settled into a metal chair, watching her from afar. Her perseverance challenged all his snap judgments. In a nearby room, Gabriel was breathing on his own but still locked in deep silence. Lisa sat by the bed, squeezing his hand as she whispered promises of a tomorrow that didn't yet exist. Come back to me. I don't know how to live without you. From the doorway, Charles felt something throb. He walked in and laid a hand on Lisa's shoulder. Go get some rest. I'll stay with him now. She hesitated, but exhausted, she gave in. Charles pulled up a chair and the heart monitor's beep started setting the rhythm for thoughts he still didn't fully understand. Charles was still trying to read the silence in the room when Lisa lifted her chin, determined, You don't have to. You don't owe us anything. The words had barely cooled when Gabriel added, Julia is your daughter, but you don't know everything. The air grew heavy. What else? Charles asked, doubt creeping into his voice. Lisa ran her hand over the fabric of her dress, gathered her courage, and revealed, When Julia was born, I almost died. The doctor said another pregnancy would be fatal. Months later, we found a baby left at the church door. Gabriel and I adopted him. That's Kevin sleeping over there. Charles followed her gaze to the boy asleep on the couch, surrounded by simple toys, unaware of the storm forming around him. He turned back to Lisa, feeling the pieces click together roughly. Why didn't you ever tell me? She took a deep breath. I didn't want pity. When you're poor, any crack becomes a sentence. I had to show that our family stands on its own. The confession opened cracks, but it also showed the glue holding that house together. Charles, now aware of the price paid in silence, stepped forward, took Lisa's hand, and firmly promised something that would change the fate of all four of them, though he had no idea how much the future would demand for that promise. Whatever happens, I won't let you or the kids carry any pain. Sitting beside Gabriel that calm night, Charles went over every point of his story. Julia was more than a daughter. She reminded him of the care he could still give. Lisa, the woman he'd chosen to love, highlighted the future he wanted to build. Gabriel, an honorable friend, symbolized a bond time wouldn't break. And Nicole, even from afar, still demanded resolve. He wouldn't go back to the old routine. But he also wouldn't abandon the company he'd built. He rested the phone on his chest and dialed without hesitation. Sell half my shares. Use part of the money to keep the jobs and send the rest to the village families. On the other end, the pause stretched. Are you sure, sir? The secretary asked, part surprise, part fear. I've never seen things so clearly, Charles replied, feeling the weight of his own words. The first light woke Gabriel before the rooster crowed. He looked at his friend, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thanks for everything, he murmured. Charles answered with a smile that erased any debt. Then he turned to Lisa and in a calm voice announced, I'm staying here. I want to build a house by the river where we can listen to the water every morning. She squeezed his hand in silence. Around them, the village still slept, but the first streaks of light crossed the sky, promising what only the brave reach for, new beginnings that change destinies. She nodded briefly, and almost immediately the door opened. Nicole walked in with a folder and dropped it on the table. These are the divorce papers, she said firmly. Now you're free. The company stays with me. It's always been our passion. Charles sighed and thanked her. Nicole turned and left without looking back. In her eyes was relief mixed with surrender. In the hallway, Gabriel, still in bed, saw Lisa with the kids and smiled. The sparkle brought color back into the room. Charles, standing in the doorway, felt relief and weight at the same time. He decided to stay in town, sell half his shares to keep the business alive, and help Lisa's family, knowing that decision settled nothing. 10 years with Nicole left a strange emptiness. Not love, but routine coming undone. Even so, the thought that bothered him most had a name: Gabriel. Would that generous man accept his presence? A few days later, Gabriel came home with his leg in a cast. Lisa split her time between her husband's bandages and the kids' needs. Charles showed up with groceries and medicine, but the place no longer felt as welcoming. One afternoon, while Lisa was scrubbing clothes in the yard, Gabriel called, "Sit down, we need to talk." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm grateful for everything you did, but do you think it's fair to stay so close to Lisa and Julia? I'm still her husband and the kids' dad." Charles took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to wreck anything. I just want to fix what I caused," he said without raising his voice. Gabriel crossed his arms, solid as a wall. "You think money and visits wipe out 10 years of pain? Leave before it gets worse." The words hit Charles like shrapnel. He'd thought showing remorse would be enough. He was about to leave when Lisa appeared in the doorway and heard the end of the sentence. "Gabriel, please," she asked, stepping between them. "Charles doesn't want to hurt us." The husband kept his hard stare. "You want him hanging around the house every day? Have you forgotten what I did for you and for Julia?" "I haven't forgotten, but he's still her father. I can't treat him like a stranger." The air in the tiny shack seemed to shrink. Julia squeezed her brother Kevin's hand while the two tried to be invisible in the corner. Gabriel saw the fear in the kid's eyes, but his pride wouldn't budge. Charles noticed too and felt the real weight of his absence. He took a step back, torn between leaving and insisting. Every move drew Lisa's tense gaze, afraid any word would light the fuse for good. The wooden floor creaked under the three adults as if it felt the strain. A mosquito buzzed near the flickering bulb, an indifferent witness to the standoff. One breath could make everything collapse, or maybe open a crack for reconciliation. Charles raised his hands. "Please, stop. I don't want you two fighting because of me." Getting no reply, he stepped outside. The rain glued his shirt to his skin and spilled the same doubts across the sidewalk that flooded his mind. Back at the rented house, the door's groan sounded final. He threw clothes into a suitcase, set on leaving town and giving those three some peace. A knock broke his motion. On the threshold stood Mrs. Susan, breathing hard, a wet shawl and a wooden box clutched to her chest. Charles stepped aside. "Before you leave, look at this," she said, setting the box on the table. When she popped the clasp, a faded photo appeared. A young man who looked a lot like Gabriel hugging a woman Charles didn't recognize. 15 years, the old woman explained. She left him when he still had nothing. Charles felt the weight of the picture. Mrs. Susan went on. "Since then, Gabriel's scared of reliving that loss. He won't admit it, but fear wears pride as a mask. Now, with you rich and Julia's biological father, he's afraid Lisa will take the same path that woman did. His jealousy comes from that wound," she finished. The jolt hit Charles like lightning. Gabriel's hostility wasn't just vanity, it was self-preservation. Facing the half-closed suitcase, Charles wondered whether staying could heal or deepen that scar. He studied the photo, the drops sliding over the glass, the suitcase ready to go, and realized the choice ahead would take more than good intentions. Still gray dawn. Charles was closing the suitcase when hurried footsteps cut the silence. Julia appeared in the doorway, face swollen from crying, and gripped his hand with unexpected strength. "Don't go, please. I can't stand seeing Mom and Dad fight." Charles knelt to face her. "I want to avoid that too, but your dad won't accept me here." The girl's eyes shimmered. "Mom already told me the truth. I know you're my dad and I don't want to lose you again. I also don't want to see Daddy sad." Her honesty disarmed Charles. In seconds, the future he'd planned felt small beside that plea. Julia drew a deep breath, gathering courage. "Stay and make them stop fighting. I want my house happy." His heart tightened. A responsibility was born that no longer fit in the suitcase. Decided, he led Julia by the hand to the living room where Gabriel paced the floor like a caged animal, and Lisa watched him with tense eyes. "Gabriel," he said, calm voice. "I'm not leaving, but I won't invade your space. I'll stay in the village, work, and I'll only see Julia if you allow it." Gabriel's look was ice, but he stayed silent. Lisa let out a sigh that didn't turn into relief. The house, suspended, waited for the next thunder already forming on the horizon. Nicole pulled up on the main street and slipped quietly into the old boarding house. She set a leather bag and a stack of papers on the table. With the calm of someone signing million-dollar reports, she announced, "I sold 30% of my shares. I paid off everything we owed. What's left is yours. Use it as you think fair." Charles felt the ground give way. "I don't get it. Why now?" "I needed to show before I leave that my moves aren't guided only by numbers. I want you to live with no loose ends." The line shattered the cold image he had of her. Charles touched the bag's strap as if testing whether it was real. "Thank you. You're heading to the village, and to Julia." Nicole nodded, turned on her heels and walked out. She wouldn't be back. At night, the sedan cut along the muddy road. She drove alone, steady hands, mind in other years. She remembered Charles's excitement when they spread expansion maps across the kitchen table, and the moment she realized his heart already belonged to Lisa, and to little Julia, babbling promises of a future far from her. The rain got heavier, drops streaked the windshield. The wipers slid back and forth, but the world ahead stayed blurry. Streetlights turned into wavering smudges while tears battled the downpour for space. Mile after mile, Nicole unraveled, memory by memory, the road that had brought her here, certain that even with no way back, there was still something of hers in that past she'd rather not forget. Why had that happened? The question throbbed as Charles, on the roof in a fine drizzle, fastened the last shingle. A neighbor showed up panting and dropped the sentence that froze the air. "They called from town. Your ex-wife had an accident." The hammer slipped and fell in the mud. Charles's chest tightened. Nicole, always so determined, had become a faint telephone whisper. He borrowed a motorcycle. 20 kilometers of winding road felt endless. Memories came in waves. The amicable divorce, their separate plans, and her last message, "I want you to be okay." Why had he let her go alone? When the police lights appeared, he saw the black sedan twisted at the foot of the slope, broken trunks all around. Officers roped off the area, flashes sliced through the fog. A white sheet covered a body on the soaked grass. Charles climbed down, knees weak. He came closer, raised a hand, but didn't touch the cold fabric. The silence was thick. Only the click of a camera kept going. Then he realized the divorce papers hadn't erased what they were. Nicole had been a partner in business, an accomplice on risky nights, the voice that laughed at defeats and dreamed up the next chance. Without her, a stretch of road was missing from his own memory. Facing that sheet, guilt and longing blended, and Charles felt that some bonds stay tight even when they look loose. Charles holds the paper with trembling fingers. The still wet ink shows an apology addressed to Lisa, Gabriel, and little Julia. He rereads every line as if he wants to burn them into memory before guilt steals his nerve. Since he'd come back to the village, he'd found only broken memories there. Arguments echoing off the walls, silences that hurt more than any word, and above all, the emptiness Nicole left. He wonders how many different futures might have sprung up if he hadn't stayed. Now, though, everything comes down to a single act. He sets on the table the thick envelope stuffed with the money from selling his shares and decides it will be the first brick of a future for Julia, even without him around. In a muffled whisper, he promises to cause no more pain. He locks the door, crosses the fog-wrapped street, and disappears into the witnessless night. The moon lights the bike pushing toward the lake, as if wanting to swallow his tracks. When day breaks, the village finds only the empty house and the letter. By the water's edge, the motorcycle rests submerged up to the handlebars. No footprints, no apparent destination, only the rumor that the man who brought storms left wrapped in his own mist. The next morning, Lisa took coffee to the rented house, hoping to see him there. The creak of the wide-open door froze her steps. On the table, a letter. One paragraph was enough to bring the tears. She ran to the next cabin and handed the envelope to Gabriel. He read slowly, hands shaking, eyes red, then hugged Lisa in silent guilt. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Jealousy got the best of me. I didn't mean to drive him away." Lisa shook her head, sobbing. "I was just trying to fix your mistakes. How did we get this far?" Julia, hearing the talk, ran to the lake where they'd found the old motorcycle. At the water's edge, she shouted, "Dad, come back!" The wind sent the cry back. The days slid into a shaky rhythm again. The money Charles left raised a school, letting Julia and Kevin study without leaving the village. With every brick laid, Lisa felt an emptiness tighten. It only took the light touching the scar on Julia's forehead for his memory to throb. No one knew if Charles was crossing distant roads or if the world had already swallowed him. The mystery grew like weeds on the lake shore. Gabriel changed. The once hot-tempered man became reserved, as if every word might reopen wounds. Life went on, kids running, vendors hawking news, the bell calling students to class. Even so, every half-open door seemed to promise his return. Every faint noise sounded like an old engine chugging down the road. Silently, everyone waited for the moment the past would cross the square. Everyone in the small town had a version of Charles's disappearance. Some swore they'd seen him on dusty highways with a worn backpack. Others whispered that the same night he vanished, he dove into the lake's dark waters to quiet his pain. The truth, though, stayed locked in a single letter Lisa kept safe like a throbbing secret. On mornings when fog blankets the shore, witnesses claim they see the silhouette of a lone man standing by the mirror of water. He stares at the lake in silence and, in a blink, melts into the haze. Legend or reality? No one can say for sure whether it's Charles or just the collective reflection of a guilt that won't fade. Meanwhile, every year on her father's birthday, Julia keeps a simple ritual. She folds a paper boat, writes a brief wish, and sets it afloat toward the middle of the lake. "Dad, wherever you are, I hope you find peace. I know one day you'll come back." The little boat drifts until the fog swallows it. Does he hear, somewhere far away? Was the choice he made fair? I want your opinion. Tell me in the comments what you would do in Charles's place, and if this story moved you, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming, so stick around. See you soon.